Welcome back to this week's From the Bridge. I'm Rick Jones, the captain of FishBait Marketing, and your host for all things from the world of corporate sponsorship and event marketing. You know, I love March Madness better than any other sporting event, and I really miss not having it last season. Here's hoping the virus will not prevent us from another year of college basketball. We did get some good news last week that college basketball will start in late November. We're still trying to determine about the early season tournaments, but it looks like we're going to have a regular season, and hopefully that will lead us to March Madness. Now, speaking of college basketball, we recently lost an icon, Tom Jernstedt, who died way too early at age 75. Tom did more to build the Final Four into the monumental cultural event it is than probably anybody I know. And my dear friend Jim Host will be here again to talk about Tom, Jim's partnership with Tom that built March Madness, and some other things relating to college basketball. We'll jump back up on the old soapbox and tell you about another wonderful place to eat on the road with Rick. One of my all-time heroes is the late, great Coach John Wooden. Coach Wooden won 10 national championships in 12 years, a record that I believe will never be broken. But Coach Wooden's legacy is so much more than winning basketball games. He was a teacher, an author, and a philosopher. Many of you may remember Coach Wooden's famous Pyramid of Success. Now, I carry a card in my wallet that Coach Wooden gave to me. So here's some lessons I learned from Coach that are on this card. On one side of the card, Coach first listed 2 sets of 3 that he learned from his father, Joshua Wooden. The Woodens grew up on a farm in rural Indiana. The first set are what he calls the nevers. Number 1, never lie. Number 2, never cheat. Number 3, never steal. Boy, could we all use some of that right now in this past summer of riots, political posturing, and a divided nation. The next set are the don'ts. Number 1, don't whine. Number 2, don't complain. Number 3, don't make excuses. How about those words of wisdom? On the other side of the card are Coach Wooden's 7-point creed. Here's his creed. Number 1, be true to yourself. Number 2, help others. Number 3, make every day your masterpiece. I really love that one. I love the fact that what Coach Wooden called the precious present. Today is the only day that really matters. What are you going to do with today? And he says, make every day your masterpiece. Number 4, drink deeply from good books, especially the Bible. We're actually recording today in my office, and I have probably 1,000 books in here. I love to read, and I guess I got that from my mama, who gave me books at an early age. But Coach Wooden was a consummate reader, and he encouraged us all to, as he said, drink deeply from good books. Number 5 is another one that I love. Make friendship a fine art. Wow, how about that? That's pretty cool. Number 6, build shelter against a rainy day. And he says there you ought to have faith in God for something, because rain is going to come to all of us. And number 7, he says, pray for guidance and counsel and give thanks for your blessings each day. Now think about those lessons. That's a full life. That's a rewarding life. That's a selfless life. And that, in a nutshell, was Coach John Wooden. Earlier this year, we had my mentor, Jim Host, on the podcast talking about his new book, Changing the Game. I'm honored to have Jim back today to visit with us again about his life and legacy, and more importantly, his friendship with the late Tom Jernstedt. Let's welcome Jim back to the bridge. Jim, thanks for being with us again today.
Well, I'm glad to always be with you, Rick.
Well, when you were last with me, we discussed your terrific new book, Changing the Game. It is just a terrific book. And not only have I read it, Charlotte's read it, Ryan's read it, and we've got a lot of young college students who fortunately listen to our podcast, as many of them are doing remote classes. So tell everybody how they can get the book.
Well, the best way to get it is to order it through jimhostbook.com. It comes directly to the group that's handling it for me, and they bring it to me, and I sign them all. And then they're immediately mailed out to whoever has ordered it.
All right, for those listening out there, you need to get this book. If you have any aspirations of working in college athletics or working in our business at all, this is a roadmap of a life and a business and how to do things. And so I need you all to order the book, Changing the Game by Jim Host. Get it today. We've been talking a lot today, Jim, about college basketball. We got the good news from the NCAA about starting the season. You know, that's great news for all of us. But at the same time, we got the sad news about your good friend and my good friend, Tom Jernstedt. I want to talk a little bit about Tom and your friendship and the contributions that he made to college basketball.
People don't realize what a influence that he has been on the history of college basketball, especially the most recent history. He served as the guiding force of the NCAA Men's Basketball Committee for 38 years. I was involved with him on 35 of those 38 years. And God never made a better person, never made a person who served for all the right reasons. I never knew him to make a decision or make a recommendation that wasn't the right recommendation for the game of college basketball. He labored over a lot of things. We would talk about those things. I never disclosed during that entire process any confidential conversations that he had with me, including the day before he died. We spent, and that was 2 weeks ago of this past Friday. He called, and he had driven to a Dunkin' Donuts place in Jupiter, where he lived and where I lived with my wife Pat for 24 years. And he lived on the 5th floor. We lived on the 10th floor. And he would drive to Dunkin' Donuts and then leave his car there and walk. And sometimes he walked 10 minutes. Sometimes he walked a half hour. Sometimes he walked an hour. He would then come back to his car. He would go in Dunkin' Donuts and buy a sack full of donut holes, and then he would drive to Publix or to a Speedway gas station, whichever one he decided to go to, where the newspapers were, and he would buy a USA Today, a Palm Beach Post, a New York Times, other newspapers, and then he would sit in his car wherever he was, and he would read the papers and had a legal pad with him and would make notes. On the Friday before he died, he had just done that, and he called and asked me questions about what I thought about the college football season and what was happening, and would teams actually play, and disturbed about how the Big Ten had handled themselves. This was before the Big Ten decided to play again. And the next morning, he died, and he had done the same thing. He had just on Saturday, a week ago, this past Saturday, he drove to Dunkin' Donuts, walked, and then drove to Publix, went in and bought the newspapers, came out and started reading them, and just died. And according to his son, Derek, who I was very close to, the autopsy showed that his heart just stopped. And he was 75 years old, far too young to die. And the amount of tributes that still are coming in from people warms my heart, because it portrays him exactly as he was, a gentle giant.
He was so thoughtful. Again, and I use the term thoughtful of what he ultimately, the decisions he made were never cavalier, and they were never selfish. They were
the difference between the way a lot of people are doing things today and the way he did things was that he would not make a decision or make a recommendation without talking to various people. I know how many times, for example, he talked to Jim Haney, who you worked with very closely
Yep.
with NABC. I know how often he talked to top coaches in the business to get their pulse of various things. There were always tough decisions that the committee had to make and for the whole future of college basketball. But he was deeply involved in the rules structure. He Ed Stites, who's a name that most people don't have a clue was a longtime person associated with Springfield College, which is where the game actually started under Dr. Naismith. And Ed Stites was the guy who wrote the rules having to do with a 3-point shot, the 24-second clock, 30-second clock, I should say, 30-second clock, and a number of other things like that. And he would work very closely with Ed Stites. He worked very closely with a lot of other people who, and he would draw a consensus. He was a consensus builder, and he never went into a meeting that I was ever involved in where he wasn't totally prepared.
Well, I know this. Every college basketball coach owes him a debt of gratitude because the money that's in the game now is directly related to the influence that Tom had.
He learned under a guy that was a great mentor to me, and that's Walter Byers. Walter Byers to this day is still the single smartest individual I was ever around in my life. He was the executive director of the NCAA from 1951 to 1986. Tom used to quote different things to me that Walter had said or had inferred, and he was a disciple of Walter Byers. And Byers was a person who really remained in the background. Few people knew him, except people who needed to know him, who were involved in the management of the NCAA. But Tom used a lot of quotes from Walter over a period of time that helped guide him.
I remember Bob Knight saying one time, with total disdain for the NCAA, Walter Byers ran this organization for 30 years with a secretary. I mean, it was like, why do we have 8,000 people at the NCAA right now?
Good point. Well, Tom, the very first NCAA Final Four I was involved in, wasn't called the Final Four yet. It was called the Division I Men's Basketball Championship. Was 1975 in San Diego, and there were two executives of the NCAA, Tom Jernstedt and Dave Kaywood. Dave ran all the media and the press and press row, etc. And he had a committee of volunteers that worked with him, and Tom ran the tournament and reported to the committee. And I remember the very first one in San Diego. The two of them stood on the floor, made decisions having to do, consulted with the chair of the committee, and the tournament ran great. And today, what are there, 250 individuals involved in the tournament? Unbelievable compared to what it was then.
Well, we started the podcast today with what I call lessons from Coach Wooden that I learned, and it's interesting that you mentioned the 75 Final Four. That was his last Final Four. Remember, Kentucky had upset an undefeated Indiana team that had beaten them very badly in the regular season, and Joe Hall had a great team and got to the championship game. And of course, right after the semifinals, Coach Wooden announced that this would be his last game.
Well, I was in the. We had done the Kentucky-Syracuse game, which was the first game of the semifinals, and Louisville should have beaten UCLA. They were down by 1 point with 3 seconds left to go, and a guy who had been a free throw shooter the entire year, 90% free throw shooter, missed the first of 1-1, and Denny Crum came within 1 point of beating his old boss. And Coach Wooden walked off the floor, and I remember like it was yesterday going in the press room. In the press room, Rick, in those years, you could put your office at your home in it, and there were probably 20 people in the press room, and I remember Coach Wooden going up and sitting down and leaning into the mic, and his first comment was, Monday night will be my final game. And I think it was the guy who was a Sports Illustrated guy, whose name escapes me right now, but he said, Coach, what did you say? He said, I said, Monday night will be my final game. I found out from his daughter, who I got to know when they started some awards for Coach Wooden. She told me that he had not told the family. I know from Gary Cunningham, who was his chief assistant sitting next to him, that he hadn't told the staff. He apparently made the decision walking off the floor after that game that that Monday night was going to be his final game, and it was.
Yeah, I got to know Nan, his daughter, later on when we did the Final Four Coaches Club. And after he passed, she would come every year, which I really appreciated, that she would make the effort to come to the Final Four and make the effort to come to the Final Four Coaches Club, where we honored those coaches that had coached in the Final Four. Going back to Tom, I mean, I number one, I've told this story on this podcast a couple of times, but, I owe so much of my career to you. When I got fired, you were the first guy I called, and I'll never forget that. You said, Rick, pack your bags, get Charlotte, drive to Jupiter, leave now. And, of course, Charlotte said, what'd you say? I said, yes, sir, let's go pack our bags. And and we drove down, and you and I sat on your balcony overlooking the ocean, and we made up FishBait. We made it up. And a year later, I had been doing a few projects for the NABC, and Tom had gone to Jim Haney and said, Jim, we need a better relationship with the coaches. And Jim was, of course, all in favor of it. And he said, but you need to make a change. You need to get a new marketing person. And Jim said, well, who should I get? And Tom said, you need to get Rick Jones. And, I mean, so he played such a huge role in my life in making that statement.
He did that because he asked me about you, and I said, who could you get any better, who was a coach himself, who understands college basketball, who understands the genesis of it, who's been at a small Division I institution, and who's been at the epitome of Division I institutions in the ACC, and who could be better that you could get than have him? And obviously, time worked out. And Tom would ask me various things, and he would ask others various things. But it was obvious that NABC needed some strength in marketing, and you gave them that.
Well, my last podcast that we actually released this week, I talked about collaboration being a lost art. People don't want to ask for advice, and I just don't get it. Somebody said the other day that it's dangerous when you want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want to be the dumbest guy in the room. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. And Tom, not unlike you, would go to people and say, what do you think? Let's put this into context. Let's look at this differently. How does this, not only meet our objectives short term, but what is it going to mean to us long term? And so I want to go back now kind of to your partnership with the NCAA, because you saw so many seismic changes, from going from a few teams to now 68 teams, from going, in a non-shot clock to shot clocks to three-point shots to all the things. How did you start with the NCAA?
Well, in 1975, at the Division I Men's Basketball Championship in San Diego, you could take a cannon and shoot it down the street in San Diego and not hit anybody who cared about the NCAA tournament, even though UCLA was in it. It was hard to believe, but it wasn't a sellout. And I remember like it was yesterday. I was on the floor, and I asked Tom Jernstedt and Dave Kaywood, how much is Mutual paying you for the radio rights? And they looked at each other and said, well, you're paying us more for Kentucky than they're paying us. And I said, well, my intelligence tells me that not that that's the wrong word. My research tells me that you guys are getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $23,000 or $24,000 total rights fees from everything you do, including people like me. And I was paying them $7,000 for the UK rights because we reported all the stations. And I knew that a lot of the people that were getting the rights weren't reporting all their stations. And so, make a long story short, I said, I'll give you $30,000. And how many people do you have taken over? How many people do you have administering the rights? And they said, 2 full time. And I said, and I'll take the responsibility for them. So I'll pay for all your people. I'll take all the responsibility, and I'll build a network. And it won't be called the host network or the mutual network. It'll be called the NCAA network because we need to build a brand of the NCAA tournament. They looked at each other and they said, well, that's interesting. And that's all they said. The next Monday morning, I got after the tournament was over with, after a week had gone by, I got a call out of the blue. Host, this is Walter Byers. Be in my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And that's all he said. Well, I didn't even know where the NCAA offices were. So I found out and drove from the airport in Kansas City, which is a KCI airport. And it took me 25 to 30 minutes to drive from the airport to Overland Park, Kansas. And I made sure I knew where the office was. And the next morning I was there 15 minutes early. And he looked at me and he said, I've checked you out and I'm going to give you an opportunity of a lifetime. And I said, what's that? He said, I want you to take over the rights for the NCAA tournament. I'm going to give you a 1-year trial. And your objective is we had 72 stations on the mutual network. I want you to build it to 200 stations. And he said, and I'm counting on you to make the NCAA radio network something worthwhile. And he said, and it's going to cost you $30,000. And my best guess is you don't have the ability of being able to put $30,000 up front. So I'm going to ask you to get a bond to make sure you can pay us. And the rest, as they say, Rick, is history. So,
well, it's fascinating, that you said that championship wasn't sold out. If you look at this men's Division I championship, Kentucky, Louisville, Syracuse, and UCLA. I mean, you don't get more blue bloods in college basketball than that. But it shows how far backwards they were at that time.
Well, the next year in 1976, the tournament was in Philadelphia, and they played at the old Spectrum, and it wasn't sold out. In fact, Tom Jernstedt came to me before the semifinals, and I was producing the broadcast with my headsets on and tap on my shoulders, and he said, "Do you need any extra tickets?" Can you imagine him saying that today? Do you need any extra tickets? And he said, if you need extra tickets, I got a few extra tickets. If you need any, I said, it's too late for today, but I sure could use some for Monday night. And of course, Monday night, the still undefeated Indiana played Michigan for the national championship. Things it's changed so dramatically. The biggest single change, I think, in the tournament was the decision that the committee, and led by Tom, made to take it to a dome in 1982 at the
New Orleans.
At the dome in New Orleans, which was the first time it was in a dome. And I remember Tom calling me and he said, Jim, can you come to New Orleans? And I told him I'd be there for the next couple of days. And he said, well, I want you to do something with me. What's that? I want you to go up. I want you to walk up with me to the top of the dome and tell me what you think. And he was still laboring over how to sell the tickets. And so they put a thing on the tickets, and I don't think this has ever been written anywhere, and they put distant view on tickets. So in other words, if somebody bought what they consider to be a bad ticket,
it was their own fault at that point, right?
and they put it on the ticket, and it was big print, distant view. So people couldn't come back on it because the NCAA was scared to death that it would be really negative publicity. Well, it wasn't negative publicity. It was people who had a chance to be to see a great game that Michael Jordan won when North Carolina beat Georgetown in the finals of the tournament, and that was also the first year it was called the Final Four.
Well, let's go back the year before. The year before in '81 was my first Final Four. I was the basketball coach at Swanee, and I had a chance to, as a member of the NABC, to go to the convention, and it was in Philadelphia. That was Virginia, LSU, North Carolina, and Indiana. And that was the Final Four where Friday morning, President Reagan had gone to the Hilton DuPont Circle to give a speech that morning and got shot. And so you were in the midst of all that. There was the agonizing decision about whether to play or not. Tell me a little bit about what went on in that.
Well, that was NBC. It was NBC's final year of doing the tournament, and I remember like it was yesterday. Wayne Duke was the chairman of the committee, and my seat, having to do with the NCAA radio network, was always always close to one of the two benches. So I witnessed a conversation between Dick Ebersol from the NBC and Wayne Duke and Tom Jernstedt, and they talked about whether they should play the game or not, and they were having this conversation while the consolation game was going on. And people say, consolation game? I didn't know they did that. They used to have a consolation game before every and that consolation game was I remember LSU playing, and I remember the game going on, and nobody was really paying any attention to the game. People were all in conversations all the way around the press area about whether the championship game should be played. And Wayne Duke and Tom Jernstedt and NBC Ebersol went off the floor, and they went into a back room, which the NCAA always had a private area for meetings. And I remember Tom coming out, and he got my eye, and he put his thumbs up, which meant to me they were going to play the game. They had called, I found out later on from Tom, that they had called the White House. They had called to find out exactly the status of the president. And apparently the president had woken up and had uttered words, and the White House felt like he was going to live. And the thing is, if they had found out that the president was in such dire shape that he wasn't going to live, there would not have been that national championship game that night.
I remember one of the great stories about President Reagan was when they wheeled him into the operating room. Number one, he didn't realize he'd been shot. And they got him in the thing, and then they realized, hey, he's bleeding, and he's very, he's in pretty critical shape. But there's the legendary story where, they rolled him into the operating room, and he looks up and he looks at all the doctors and nurses, and he says, "Tell me you're all Republicans." and one of the doctors leans down and says, "Mr. President, today we're all Republicans." But what a great sense of humor and grace under literal fire in that. But that Final Four was so interesting because, number one, Virginia with Ralph Sampson had beaten North Carolina, I want to say 3 times. Had beaten them in the home and home and beaten them in the ACC tournament. And they meet in the semifinals and they lose. North Carolina wins. And, of course, Indiana had Isaiah Thomas and Randy Whitman, a great club, and then ended up winning that championship game for Knight's second championship. And then we go to the Dome in '82, and then in '83 we went back to a smaller venue because we went to the Pit in Albuquerque, and that's when Valvano and NC State made that great run.
Yep. That's probably the toughest NCAA. That was our. I remember that they built the press area up outside of the Dome, outside of the Pit, in a tent area outside. So in order to get to the floor, you had to walk up the steps. There was no elevator. So you had to walk up the steps and down the steps. And that was a tough place for a lot of the reporters, a lot of the people who were part of the press group to navigate up there and down. And I think people pretty much made up their mind after that one that having it in a dome was such a bad thing, because at the domes they always had the press area and the media accessibility right close to the floor.
And then I think they went to the Kingdome in '84 when Georgetown won.
Well, Kentucky played the worst half of basketball that I've ever seen a Kentucky team play. It wasn't worse from the point of view of mechanics. They couldn't shoot. They hit 3 out of 38, I think it was, 3 out of 39 in the second half, and they were ahead at halftime by 7. I think it was by 7 over a really good Georgetown team. And Michael Graham, who was the enforcer on the front line for Georgetown, totally shut down the Kentucky Twin Towers, Melvin Turpin and Sam Bowie. And Kentucky had a heck of a team. Dickie Beal was captain of that team, a little fireplug guard, and it was unbelievable. I think it was 3 out of 33, 3 out of 34 in the second half. Kentucky couldn't hit the broadside of a bar.
Well, the gods, the basketball gods, gave it back to Georgetown the next year because they play Villanova in your hometown in Lexington, and I think Villanova shot like 89% or something.
Well, Villanova only missed one shot in the whole second half of that game.
Yeah.
Unbelievable shooting performance. If they had to do it all over again, they could never shoot that well.
No, but it's really interesting if you look at the dichotomy of the year before when Kentucky couldn't throw it in the ocean from the pier, and the following year Villanova simply cannot miss. I mean, they just
and Rick, that's the game. That's a great game of college basketball. And of course, they didn't have the shot clock yet. I went into the College Basketball Hall of Fame with Patrick Ewing the same year, and Patrick and I got to be, during that process, got to be really good friends. And we sat at that luncheon that day, and I said, give me your assessment of the team that lost in Lexington and the team that won in the Kingdome. And he said the team that lost in Lexington was far better than the team that won in the Kingdome. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. He said, I thought we would win it hands down, especially when 3 of the 4 teams in the championship were from the Big East. He said, we'd beaten all of them during the year. And he said, and I knew we were far superior. He said, but I could not believe that every time Villanova threw a shot up, it went in.
Well, you had the radio rights. When did you create the corporate partner program? Because that's another seismic change in basketball.
1981, I had made up my mind that I was never really going to be able to make the kind of money that it needed to be made to pay the rights fees and pay all the expenses of the tournament. And I had had a background with Procter and Gamble in the 60s, and had learned about branding and shelf facings and so on and so forth. And the one thing I learned was that if we came out with a 5-cent off 24-pack Tide, meaning 24 boxes to a case and 5 cents off, we would come out first, and then Colgate would match it and Lever would match it. And we had no competitive advantage for a week or two. I mean, we had competitive advantage for a week or two, but we had no competitive advantage long term. And I'm laying in bed thinking about how can I improve sales and improve stuff. And it came to me like a light bulb went on. Said, what about if we could get a brand to become a corporate sponsor of the Final Four? What if we could get a brand to do that, and without doing anything toward prostituting signage in the arena, which both Tom Jernstedt and Walter Byers were adamantly opposed to. They wanted it to be like an Olympic site, be totally commercial free inside. And I said, but the thing we can do, we can really build the branding of the NCAA tournament if we can have a official sponsor of the NCAA tournament. So I was standing with Walter Byers at the Union League in 1981. This is, again, the year that President Reagan got shot. And this was Sunday night. And this was before the president was shot on Monday.
That's right, Monday morning. That's right.
And we were standing at the Union League. Walter Byers always had a Sunday night event for NBC and for members of the NCAA executive committee, a bunch of presidents. And he invited me for the first time to that event. And so he was standing by the fireplace. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I went up to him and I said, Walter, it's time for corporate sponsors and NCAA tournament. He looked at me and he said, host over my effing dead body. And he walked away from me. So I said, well, I'm going to keep in touch with you about it. And he said, you do anything you want. So I sent him a letter outlining why it would work. And every month I followed up by sending him another letter about why this would make sense. It will not commercialize the tournament. It will elevate the brand of the NCAA tournament. It will elevate the brand eventually of the Final Four, etc. So 6 months later, he never answered me. One time he sent me a note and just said, duly noted. So then out of the blue, he called me and he said, host, remember that thing you were talking to me about at the Union League about corporate sponsors? I said, yeah. He said, be in my office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Goodbye. And so I went out and he sat in his office without any notes in front of him. And of course, I'm super prepared. And he said, how much money do you think you can get from selling one of those things? And what I didn't know at that time was that the College Football Association, CFA, which Chuck Ninus had started, and which had won the decision about schools being able to understand their own power by the fact that the NCAA couldn't control college football through NCAA television, which they had. There used to be a NCAA football game of the week, and ABC through those years, we're in Arledge, would say we're going to have an NCAA football game of the week, Nebraska and Oklahoma, and that would be the only game on television. And so Georgia and Texas primarily, and several other schools, filed a lawsuit. Well, what I didn't know was that Walter had picked up intelligence that the CFA was going to move to take over college basketball, and and the tournament, and use the same process. And so, and I found that out later on. But the reason he called me was he wanted to know how much money I thought I could make. And I said, well, I think I could sell it for $250,000. He said, okay, I get half, the NCAA gets half, you get half, and you got to pay all your expenses out of your half. And he stood up. This was 15 minutes into the meeting. And he stood up and he said, a deal? And I said, yes, sir. And I shook his hand. He said, that's fine. He said, I'll put something in writing to you. And that was the end of it. Was 15 minutes. Well, I then had a really close friend who had been with P&G that I had trained, who came to Lexington once a year with a group of his friends to play poker and go to Keeneland. And so I would help him get tickets, good tickets at Keeneland. And so I called him and he said, I got a great idea for you. One of the guys that's coming is a guy you'll know who you work with, and he's with Gillette. And so anyway, I ran it by him, and it so happened it was in a window, a time frame during the year that they needed to get some exposure. Bottom line is I went in to meet with him and with two others that were there. And I started, and we didn't have PowerPoints in those years. So you had to go in for a presentation with these big whiteboards, and you'd make them up, and you'd take them out of these big
Yep.
things that you carried. And so I was setting those up on easels. And this one guy said, Jim, you don't have to go through all this. What have you got? And I said, I've got you can have the exclusive rights to the NCAA tournament. And they said, well, NCAA basketball tournament? I said, yeah. How many tickets do we get? That's the first thing. How many tickets do we get? And I hadn't asked Walter that. So I said 20. Just made that up. And they said, well, will they be good tickets? I can guarantee they'll be good tickets or we won't have a deal. And they said, okay, how much? And I said, $500,000. Now, understand, I told Walter I thought I could get 250. So I said, $500,000. They looked at each other and said, okay, we'll take it. That was a 15-minute conversation. They saw the value in it. And obviously.
Was that Jim LeMay?
No. Jim LeMay wasn't there
He
yet.
wasn't there yet, okay.
It was a guy by the name of Dick O'Hearn.
Okay, yep.
Who Jim LeMay had worked for.
Yep.
And Dick O'Hearn was in the meeting. But Bill Ryan ran the meeting. Bill Ryan was the head of the personal care products division. And he was a guy who had been with P&G, who I had known at P&G. So he already knew me going into the meeting. And so that's how it happened. And so then I sent a note to Walter, and then I called Walter, and I couldn't get him on the phone. And I finally got him on the phone, and I said, Walter, I've sold the first one. He said, who to? I said, Gillette. And he said, how much did you get? And I said, $500,000. He big pause on the other end of the phone. You're kidding me. I said, no, I'm not kidding. And you think about that, and you think about how much that the NCAA was getting in television rights then, which wasn't a lot of money. I think they got $12 million a year, something like that. And we were getting $500,000 from one partner, and I think Walter was calculating in his head. He had made me agree that we could only sell no more than 6, and then I got him to agree to increase it to 8, and we would have all exclusive categories. So that's how it started.
You know, you talk about the boards at the time when we didn't have presentations. A few years after I had been doing the college basketball stuff, a guy who had worked for me was working at Turner Broadcasting, and Turner wanted to take the NBA that was on Turner on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights and move it to Monday night, you know, once Monday Night Football was over, because Monday was such a great night as a viewing destination for guys, and they thought it would be an easy migration. And so, you know, this guy says, I want this agency to come in and pitch. And they were like, well, this guy doesn't know anything about pro basketball. He says, well, he knows about basketball. Let him come in. I remember I took art boards in, and so the brief is, how do you let people know that the NBA will be on Monday nights on TBS? And so I came in with, you know, a stack of art boards, and I picked it up and said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to the top 25 ADIs in the country, and you're going to put up billboards. And I flipped it up, and the billboard said ABC Monday Night Football. And they're looking at me like I'm nuts. And I said, and you're going to put that up in September. And then in October, and I picked it up, you're going to mark out football, and you're going to mark out ABC. And in November, you're going to put NBA basketball. And then in December, you're going to put on TBS. And I have one more board. And a young lady in the room said, ABC will sue us. And I flipped up the board, and it said, ABC will sue you. And I said, and everyone in America will know it. You'll settle out of court, but everybody will know you're on Monday night. And they said, God, if we weren't owned by Time Warner, we'd do this. And they didn't do it. They hired Golan Harris, a PR firm. It was so unsuccessful. The NBA's never been on Monday night. So I remember the art board days very, very well. Hey, let me ask you this, Jim, right now, talking about the committee and talking about Walter Byers' perception of the College Football Association and what may have happened. In the pandemic, where so many of the Power 5 schools are losing so many millions of dollars, do you think there could be a power play where the Power 5 leave the NCAA to create their own men's basketball tournament?
Yes, I do. I don't think I don't have any evidence of this from directly. I've just picked up bits and pieces of it. But my opinion is that you'll find that happen sooner rather than later. I think there is so much concern or lack of whatever you want to call it with the NCAA that I think it'll be sooner rather than later. First of all, the only thing that they need the NCAA for right now is for enforcement, and I think they can do their own enforcement going forward. There's so much money in college football, and there's so many decisions that are made by people who are put in charge at the NCAA to make those decisions. And the thing that concerns me and really bothers me is that you've got presidents who have put a president in place at the NCAA. So the presidents are in control, and yet can you tell me that the presidents are controlled at a conference when indeed the conferences are run by athletics, and so you've got presidents who are in charge and presidents who are not in charge. And I think the Big Ten found out how who really runs things as it relates to money. You got these people who are that the universities have to have as donors to their institutions. You've got people who have been very good for universities in terms of academic buildings and academic process and so on and so forth. And yet at the same time, they were turning all these donors off. The Big Ten found out about that, and the Pac-10's certainly, Pac-12 certainly found out about it. So it's unbelievable the process that's going on in college athletics today. And I think and the NFL's found out you can play football in this environment. College football has found out, those that are playing has found out they can play in this environment. You just got to be careful. You've got to have rules that dictate how these players play and how they practice. And I know at Kentucky alone, they've done a heck of a good job of keeping all the players COVID free. So I hope we can come out of this thing properly at the end of the day, and that people that are playing competitive sports today are able to get out of it without COVID affecting the games.
Well, I'm also dismayed. You went to the University of Kentucky on a baseball scholarship. I'm watching so many universities drop sports left and right, and it's just so debilitating to young people that have worked so hard their whole lives to be a swimmer or a tennis player or a baseball player, and see that happen. And I'm hopeful that that we'll figure out a way to not keep these sports away long term, but I just don't know what's going to happen. I want to switch gears for a minute. You've worked with a lot of great college basketball coaches over the years, especially at UK. So I'm going to give you some names, and you tell me a little bit about each one. All right. So I'm going to start with Coach Adolph Rupp.
Most disciplined person I've ever been around in my life. He ran practices. His favorite saying in practice would be, if you can improve upon the silence, do it. You never heard any players clapping or cheering or anything. All you heard was a squeak of the sneakers on the floor. He ran every practice with an exact discipline of, here's what we're going to do in the first 15 minutes. Here's what we're going to do in the second 15 minutes. He would have two plays, number 7 and number 8, number 5 and number 6, and it was nothing more than a double guard around and a double pick on the baseline. And I remember a clinic I went to just to listen to him, and he would say, "Here's how we run number 7. Here's how we run number 8." And somebody raised their hand and said, "Coach, why are you showing me how you run your best plays?" And he would say, "Because you can't ever beat it. You can't ever compete it because we're running better than anybody." And he did. They ran that double pick ran to such a degree, so perfectively, and he would run the same plays over and over and over again in practice.
All right, I'm going to mention another one that was one of his assistants that moved on and coached where I got to coach at Swanee, Lon Varnell.
Lon was Coach Rupp's probably favorite all-time friend. When Lon Burnell got in business of promoting concerts, Lon Burnell represented Lawrence Welk. And when Memorial Coliseum was going to be opened in 1951, the very first performance by a concert was by Lon Burnell representing Lawrence Welk. Lawrence Welk put on the first concert, and that's because of his friendship with Coach Rupp. They had a very close personal friendship.
Joe Hall.
Probably the most understated and best coach at UK. He, for a guy to follow a legend like he followed with Coach Rupp, they found out UCLA basketball's never been the same.
No, they haven't figured it out, have they?
It's never been the same. But Joe Hall, because he played for Coach Rupp, he was a Kentucky guy from Cynthiana. Uh, he introduced something that no coach was doing. They would run wind sprints and before the season started, and he would go out and they would time the wind sprints. And that's before you could allow practice to start, but nobody said you couldn't start running. And so he had them running. Coach Rupp never did that. He also started them with weights. Coach Rupp never did that either. So he introduced weights to get them stronger, and he introduced wind sprints, and they were always in better physical condition, especially in the early part of the year than any other team. And he used a lot of Coach Rupp's plays, but he also introduced some things of his own, and he was a great basketball coach.
Eddie Sutton.
Probably the best guy with a piece of chalk I ever saw. He had Coach Iba's defense, and a lot of the people in Lexington didn't like the way they played. But the first year he was there, they should have gone to the Final Four. They won 32 games, and they had beaten LSU 3 times during the course of the year, 2 times in the regular season and 1 time in the SEC tournament. And they got beat. Kenny Walker was a guts of that team, and they lost in the SEC in the NCAA tournament to LSU, I think by 3 points. And that's the same LSU team that went on to the Final Four. He was just a great. Eddie Sutton got really with a broad brush of badness over him because of the last year he was there when somebody put something in a express envelope and it to Chris Mills in California, and Eddie was fired by the university over what had happened in terms of the NCAA investigation. But Eddie went on to show what a great coach he was at Oklahoma State, and of course if they had the induction of the Hall of Fame this year, he would have gone in the Hall of Fame with induction. But for all intents and purposes, he's inducted in the Hall of Fame and very deserving. He was a great coach. He was a really terrific. But Kenny Walker, who's become a really good friend of mine, told me that Eddie was the best coach he ever played for.
Wow, that's high praise. Okay, so then your good friend C.M. Newton, who's the AD, has to go replace him, and he goes and gets Rick Pitino.
Rick is, without question, the best preparation coach I've ever seen. I went to a practice with him one day, and he was in a film study, and they were going to play Utah in the NCAA tournament. And he said, "Come go with me." And I went in, and they had a guy. What the heck was the guy's name at Utah? He was a really good player. Anyway, he said, "Watch what he does." And sure enough, he said, "I want you to step on his foot and make him go the way he can't shoot." And they did. And he only got, I think, Keith Van Horn was his name.
Yeah, great point.
And Van Horn was his name. And I think he ended up getting 6 or 8 points because they kept stepping on his foot and making him go the wrong way. That's how much of a fanatic he was on preparation. Plus, I never saw a coach get a team ready to play like he did in terms of their conditioning. They were in better condition than any team they played, which is why they would run the press like they did all over the floor on a continuous basis. And the first year was there, Kansas beat them like a drum because they kept throwing the ball over top of the press, and Rick kept using the press. Obviously, that worked in the long run, which is the team that then ended up winning the Final Four in 1996 in New York with probably, of all the Kentucky teams I've seen, was probably the best team.
That was Mashburn, right?
Yeah. No, it was Tony Delk and Walker and Antoine Walker. And they played at the Meadow. It was the last game that was played in a made-for-college arena, which is the Meadowlands.
Tubby Smith.
Best human being I've ever been around in coaching by far. Probably the classiest guy. the best human being. I've never been around a coach that was a better human being than Tubby Smith.
And John Calipari.
Best recruiter I've ever seen, best sales guy, best marketing guy I've ever been around. He knows more about marketing than you or I do. He has a gut feel for what's going on in the world, what's going on in the country, what's going on in basketball. He is able to sell recruits on what he's doing, and he's been very, very successful. He's got more players playing in the NBA. He's got more players playing in the NBA right now than any other coach by far. And the proof's in the pudding in terms of him being able to get guys ready for the tournament. I've been getting ready for the NBA by the way he's been able to deliver on that. And if you think about Jamal Murray, about him carrying Denver on his back, and all these players that played for Cal will tell you that he got them ready for the NBA.
Yeah, I think he convinced them that there were only so many superstars in the NBA, but if you play defense and rebound, you can play 15 years and make a whole lot of money. And so he got guys to buy in to playing defense and rebounding.
No question.
Jim, the virus has changed our lives in more ways than I even care to admit. You and Pat are so outgoing, so social. How have you guys had to adjust during this time?
Well, I've learned what a great person Pat is, although I already knew it. I've learned now because we have stayed in. We have not gone out. I think we've been out to eat one time since March. We stay by ourselves. Her immune system is not very good because she's on her third pacemaker, and so I haven't wanted to do one thing that would injure that, and she hasn't wanted to do one thing that would injure me. I'm 82 and she's 80. We'll be a year older in November, and so we've learned to spend a lot of time together. I've gotten a lot done in terms of writing. I love to write. I love to read. And so I've done a lot more. I stay on the phone with a lot of people who call me all the time for advice and counsel. I still advise a lot. I've never refused a young person who's ever called me about meeting with me at all. And that still happens. And I'm still meeting on a continuous basis, either by Zoom or if they want to come to my house, they got to put a mask on, and we sit far apart from each other. I do that fairly often, but we just don't go out, Rick. We stay to ourselves and feel like this pandemic will be over sometime in the future. And in the meantime, we want to stay healthy.
Well, it's interesting. You know, Charlotte said to me, she said, honey, I married you for better or for worse, but not for this. You know, in 2019, I traveled 309 days. And so I have a history of dating my wife. And but it's, obviously we've talked about this a lot. I've very much outkicked my coverage. I married the right woman, and we've done the same thing. We just haven't gone anywhere. Her parents are in their late 80s and very vulnerable, and we've gone back and forth to see them in Live Oak, and we just said we weren't going to risk, taking anything down to there. I've been a little dismayed, though, with the selfishness of people. It's not hard to wear a mask. It's not hard to do the right thing. It's been disappointing, I think, to see some of the behavior.
Well, it's part of what we live in this country these days, and the unfortunate part about it is that people can say that I have found that most of the friends that I've got, that Pat and I have, are trying to do things the right way, and trying to make sure that they continue to do things the right way. And when you really think about the social aspect of our country and what people are used to, I think the country is coming out of it fine. You can't. You think about losing 200,000 people, but on the other hand, when you think about that as a percentage of the nation's population and what it could be, it's a toll. And I don't believe the numbers from the other countries I don't. I believe it's much worse than a lot of other places than what they say it is. But with this too, eventually will pass, and we will find a way out of it. And the country's too great for it not to happen.
Well, I thank you again for being with us today. Listen, I thank you for sharing thoughts on Tom Jernstedt, a guy we lost way, way too early. I appreciate all your wisdom. Stay well, my friend. Again, the book is Changing the Game by Jim Host. Get the book.
Get it to order it. You can order it through jimhostbook.com. You can just look it up, Changing the Game, jimhostbook.com, and I autograph all the books, and I'm glad to do it. And also, you'd be surprised, Rick, at the number of people, young people especially, who have bought the book, who call me and ask me specific questions. And I'm available for any young person anytime for advice and counsel.
Well, you've been a great mentor to me. You continue to be a great mentor to many, many other people, and I appreciate you. And thanks for being with us today from the bridge.
Love to Charlotte.
Thanks, buddy. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's jump back up on the old soapbox. We've talked a lot about mentors and colleagues today. This one is from my book, Analog Advice in a Digital World, and it's entitled, Even the Lone Ranger Did Not Travel Alone. Business and life is a team sport. When I recruit an employee, I gravitate to those who have played a team sport in the past, or have played in a band, or been in a theater group. The kind of people who understand that you have to play together to accomplish great things. Parts of our educational system are archaic. Too many things are designed for everyone to do their own work, which rarely happens in business or in life. We all have to interact in order to accomplish big things. My favorite play in basketball is the assist. I love a great pass that leads to a basket much more than the basket itself. Teams that share the ball and hit the open man win more games. So here's some questions for you. Do you make others better? Are you the kind of teammate everyone knows they can count on in good times and bad alike? Are you happy for the successes of others? So how's your assist to scoring ratio? And that's today's view from the Soapbox. Let's close with another place to eat on the road with Rick. The very first Final Four I attended with my wife, Charlotte, was the 1985 NCAA Final Four in Lexington, Kentucky. And that was the famous Final Four where Villanova upset Georgetown in Rupp Arena. We stayed at a very special place and have returned there a few times. It's the Shaker Village at Pleasant Hill, Kentucky. Now, the Shakers were a religion. Now, interestingly, they were a religion that did not believe in procreation. So the religion died out. You know, when you're not reproducing new converts, it's easy for the religion to go away. They were called the Shakers because when they did their singing, they danced and shook. And this was an interesting religion, but they were an interesting people in that they built amazing, classic, simple furniture, and they also produced and sold seeds. Well, they established a farm near Lexington, Kentucky that has now been restored as a resort. And their restaurant called the Trustee's Table serves wonderful farm-to-table foods like amazing fried chicken, fresh vegetables actually grown on the farm, and fresh baked breads, along with their famous Shaker Village lemon pie. Stop by this place the next time you're in the Bluegrass State. That's a wrap for today. Thanks once again to my friend Jim Host for sharing with us. We hope to see you next week from the bridge.